We're going to start with our good friends from the state of Utah, Darren Underwood, who's the Deputy Legislative Auditor General, and Stephen Allred, the Deputy Fiscal Analyst, Office of Legislative Fiscal Analyst. And Darren, I'm not sure if I talked to you. I actually did a paper on the Legislative Auditor General. I'll have to send it to you. It was very good. You guys do an excellent job there. So,
Bluetooth mode.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, gentlemen, and Darren, if you want to maybe go first.
Okay, so I think I'll go first if that's all right. My name is Steve Allred, and I'm the Deputy Fiscal Analyst for the state of Utah for the Office of the Legislative Fiscal Analyst. And what we do is review briefly what our office does to review new programs and some of the impacts that we've seen on those new programs as a result of our review. And hopefully in about 10 minutes, I'll give you at least one or two things that you can take away that will be beneficial to you, recognizing that no state is perfect, and you probably have a lot of great ideas too. And I'm not here to act like we have a corner on all the good ideas, but hopefully we have something that we can share that will be helpful to you. And just as brief background on the Utah Office of the Legislative Fiscal Analyst, we are nonpartisan and non-cameral, and our mission is to effect good government through objective, accurate, and relevant budget advice. We use those three OAR, our letters: objective, accurate, and relevant. We say that's the oar that propels us through the water as we do our job. So our office is really divided into three sections. One is long-term fiscal sustainability, which includes revenue estimating. Then we also do budgeting, we staff subcommittees, and then we report. We have 21 full-time staff, and that consists of analysts, economists, some IT people, and administrative staff. And then the state of Utah has a 45-day annual general session. So during those 45 days, we have to get the budget done, which means we do a little bit of work before the session starts to make sure we're ready to go on the first day of session. We spend about 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of session, we call it the budget fortnight, where we just focus heavily on the budget. And state of Utah's budget is $18.5 billion, so probably relatively small from your perspective. $18.5 billion total funds, and then state income tax to sales tax consists of about $8 billion, and then the rest of that is federal funds and fees and restricted accounts and that kind of thing. Like many states, we are right now having a challenge of our sales tax not keeping pace with the economy as much as our income tax is, and we're in the thralls of tax restructuring, tax reform, trying to level that out a little bit. So just to talk briefly about how new programs get funded in Utah. The Utah legislature is the Appropriations Committee. It's got an interesting structure, but so the entire legislature is a committee, and then it's divided into 8 subcommittees. So every member of the Utah legislature sits on at least one appropriations subcommittee. And early in the session, after that 2 weeks of intense budget review, looking at what's in the base budget, we release the base budget bills by the 16th day of the general session. And that's a strategy so that if the governor were to veto something, he has 10 days to do that during the session, and then we're still in session and we can override that veto if we need to before we adjourn. And the good thing about that too is that it gets 80 or 90% of the budget done, the non-controversial parts done and out of the way. So then we spend the rest of the session arguing over the remaining 10 or 20% that we don't agree on. And if we don't agree on it and everybody goes home, state government can still run because we have the base budget set and ready to go early on in the session. In the state of Utah, the governor only recommends a budget. He or she doesn't have the ability to start the budget process off or lay the groundwork for it. It's a recommendation only, but the governor does have line item authority, which we can override with 2/3 vote. In Utah, new programs get funded either through a bill. If the bill has a policy change, then it can either carry its own appropriation, or we, the Fiscal Analyst Office, put a fiscal note on it. And if the bill has a fiscal note and passes, the legislature almost always funds the amount of money that we put in the fiscal note. If there's no policy change and it's just a straight appropriation, then we call that a request for appropriation, and the legislature just treats that as all other requests for appropriation. We put it in a database. It goes through the process. If it gets funded, great, it gets out there and the program gets funded. So as far as fiscal notes are concerned, we prepare a fiscal note for every bill. That's our office's responsibility. And that includes substitutes too. So last session, we prepared about 1,400 fiscal notes on all the bills that went through. We do that, we have a 3 business day deadline to get the fiscal notes done. I'd like to show you, hopefully I can make this work. I'd like to show you a picture of a fiscal note. Let's see, I believe that should be one right there. Okay. Do you see that all right?
Yeah, we see it perfectly.
Okay. So this is what a fiscal note looks like in the state of Utah. They're generally pretty short, just one or 2 pages. We show the impact on state government for both revenues and expenditures. Then we show the impact on local governments, the impact on individuals and businesses. Then the regulatory impact is relatively new. We've only been doing this for a little while, but we show the enactment of legislation, whether it will change the regulatory burden for Utah residents or businesses. Then we show if it requires a performance note. And I'll talk a little bit more about performance notes because that's where we go with new programs the most. When we realize that they are a new program, we as a fiscal analyst office make a determination that it requires a performance note. So because they're very common, fiscal notes are very common, they're kind of the basis we use to put at the bottom if it requires a performance note or if it requires any other kind of review. So that bill I showed you required a performance note, and I'm going to show you what a performance note looks like. Oh. Well, I'll put up, I know you can't see me right now, I apologize, but I'll put up on the screen now what a performance note looks like. So this is a performance note. So we, by legislative rule, the fiscal analyst office is responsible to look at every bill and within 1 day decide if it creates a new program or a new agency. And that is defined as either something that is brand new or a significant expansion in services or expansion in people being supplied those services. And that grant admittedly can be somewhat subjective at times. For example, if a bill appropriates $100,000 for a pilot program in public education, $100,000 is not a lot of money in public education. So whether that's significant or not is somewhat subjective for us to decide, but we usually err on the side of requiring the performance note, even if it's relatively small money, if it looks like it's something new that hasn't been done before, or some kind of expansion that is significant enough to require additional work on the part of the agency. So this is a performance note created by the Department of Health. It lists the purposes, the services, and expected outcomes. So here they said the eligible individuals will be able to receive oral health care, which will improve the total health of the client. So that's what they're going to be measured against when, by the legislative auditors down the road, after this program's had time to be implemented. We listed performance measures right here. So the goal is access to oral health care for senior citizens. They have a target of 95 individuals per year starting in 2020. And currently the baseline is 0 because those individuals were not receiving Medicaid dental at this point in time. So that's how the performance notes work. We'll have, Darren will share with you in a second more about performance notes and how they follow through on those. There's one last thing I wanted to show you that we're pretty excited about, and hopefully that this will be something that will be helpful for you too. About 8 years ago, we started a report called the Fiscal Note and Budget Item Follow-Up Report. And that's where we go back in time and look at our own fiscal notes to see if they're accurate. And also we look at, did the agencies implement the program in time, and do they have good performance measures for how that program should be operating? And we used first we used a like a red, yellow, green stoplight indicator for each one of those things. So if it was implemented on time, they got a green light. If it was on budget, they got a green light. If we estimated the right amount, we got a green light. We found that the stoplight was somewhat making the report longer than it needed to be. And we decided in the last 2 years, if everything is good, all green lights, we would put that in appendix and just say, we reviewed this program, it's good, and not include it in the report beyond that. So now we're including only items that require, at least in our opinion, some kind of a recommendation or review by the legislature. So I want to show you what that looks like. And we just barely gave this to our Executive Appropriations Committee a couple of days ago. So this is it, fiscal and budget item follow-up report. As I mentioned, we look at implementation, accuracy, and performance. And this report turns out to be approximately 120 pages long. We have a table of contents here that lists the subcommittee section, the title, and what page it is on. So I thought I would just show you what we have on page 17. This was so funny, we gave for a tax commission economist, and it doesn't seem to want to scroll unless I use my mouse. The benefit of this report is that, aside from saying if we were accurate or not, it also puts everybody on notice that next year this is going to get reviewed and be in this report. So all recipients of new funding and us as analysts know that we're going to be held accountable for how we implement or how we estimate these costs. In this case, the Tax Commission and the Fiscal Analyst Office determined that they could use a new economist because of increased complexity in federal and IRS data laws. So we recommend the legislature appropriate $125,000 for salary and benefits of an economist. You can see that as of May, they had only spent $16,000, and by the fiscal year end, they estimated they would spend $40,000, primarily because the Tax Commission was late hiring an economist. And I'll bet this is somewhat common, not just in Utah, but also in Pennsylvania or wherever you are. Sometimes agencies take a while to implement a program or to hire somebody, and it gives them a little one-time funding cushion that sometimes they'll apply to something else if you're not watching it. So in this case, we recommended that they take that one-time money of $84,950 and lapse it back to the general fund. Now, fiscal year 19 just ended on June 30th, and they did not lapse that back to the general fund, but they were neutral. It's funny, as you can see, that they were neutral to this recommendation. A lot of agencies will oppose that recommendation. They did not lapse it, but the value here is that we have assigned this report to all the appropriation subcommittees, and during this interim, they will look at these recommendations and they will take action on it. And most likely the committee will decide to take that money and spend on something else or put it back in the general fund, unless the tax commission can come and make a valid case that they need to keep that money for something that they're working on. So that will receive some kind of review and consideration by the appropriations subcommittee. Now, you may also wonder, well, how do these recommendations get acted on? And the answer is, in this year's report, we also included let me show you, we also included a review of the recommendations. So in 2018, we had this report, we made recommendations. Now a year later, we want to show them whether or not those were acted on. So let's see, I think it's this one. Yeah. So this report shows the status of 2018 follow-up report recommendations. So these are all the recommendations we gave them a year ago. And here we do have like a green light saying, here's the report, here's what we recommended. It was adopted by the committee, so green light for that one. So we actually do follow up on our follow-up to make sure something happened to our recommendations. I think I've talked for a while and shown you a lot of things. At this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions or let Darren Underwood from the auditor's office talk to you, whatever you prefer.
How about we go right to Darren?
Okay.
So, Representative Grove, is that you at the mic?
Yes, that is I. Hello.
I just wanted to get an idea of who we're talking to. So, I sent Jordan a couple of handouts. Did you get a couple of handouts? Okay.
Yep, we got them right
Then
here. Yep.
We'll refer to some of those. So Steve talked about follow-up, and as I was trying to gather my thoughts about how I could share what our office has done, I shouldn't say our office, I should say our legislature, our legislators. That was the theme that came to mind for me is the crucial importance of follow-up. My first point would be that I think in my years of experience, Steve and I have actually been with the legislature 25 plus years. And I think it's safe to say that the lawmakers are pretty good at making laws. We get a lot of things passed. What happens next? That's sometimes the harder question to answer. And so I wanted to, in my time, give 3 things that our office has helped facilitate to do this follow-up. This first handout I had, closing the policy circle. I wanted to kind of take you through that. This is sort of lawmaking 101 that is going to be known to you, but I thought it could help us frame. Something comes before you. We had a recent audit on our Department of Financial Institutions that regulates the payday lending industry. Do you allow payday lending in Pennsylvania?
No.
Okay, so maybe I didn't pick the best example.
It's all
But,
good. There's always a
it's
push to do
certainly
it.
Something that is a key topic nationally. We had some laws to tell our regulator, you need to put some regulations on this. So you must be one of the states that just says, we're not even going to regulate, we're just not going to allow it. So our research and fiscal analyst office helped put that legislation together. It then gets kicked to the executive branch, the department to oversee that. And then we have where we come in, it's like, okay, well, what do we do now? How do we know if the regulations are working? And that's where our office comes in. And we say, we need to know if things are working. And so we kind of use this as a model in everything we do. Are the policies that the legislature enacting, are they getting us where we want to be? And so I like to use the policy circle as sort of framework. And then I'd like to talk about 3 things that our legislature has done. First, to use legislative oversight committees. Second, the best practices and performance notes. I'll get into that a little bit more that Steve talked about. And then our annual report of legislative action items. So first, let me talk about our office. When we release a performance audit, we report to an audit committee, an audit subcommittee that is probably all the power brokers in the legislature, because it's the Speaker of our House, the President of our Senate, our 2 majority leaders, and our 2 minority leaders. They are the gatekeepers of all of our audits. And they hear the audits. And over the years, when I first started here, they may or may not have sent it to a different committee. They may have just said, okay, thanks for doing that work. In the last couple of years, we had leadership that was very much wanting to have greater legislative oversight. And now with every audit that comes out, they make sure that a topic-specific committee for example, the financial institutions, our business and labor interim or appropriations committee would be the lead committee on that. And then there would be an extra committee as an additional review. Now you might be thinking, well, that's not an original idea for a legislative committee to hear a report. I think where our legislature has found some success is they are now requiring those committees, so the co-chairs and the analysts assigned, to report back. They don't want to just hear, okay, we heard it, it was a great report. They want to know, are you going to help the agency get those recommendations implemented. If the recommendation was to the legislature, what action is going to be taken? Do you think there wasn't enough information to take action, or you're satisfied with the status quo, and they want that report? So that's been something that has really changed things, and the executive branch agencies have taken notice of that, and they know when an audit comes out that it's not just going to end at the audit subcommittee. It's going to go to one or two other committees, and they'll be brought in to say, we are implementing this recommendation or we're not, and here's why. And if they don't give that report, they're going to be asked. And so that's the first thing that we have helped facilitate in our legislature with good legislative leaders to help with follow through and accountability. Next, let me go to what I talked about with our Steve mentioned performance notes, and he showed you an example. I call this individual legislator responsibility because you may think you have the most brilliant idea to bring something forth. All legislators think that, right? But this time we're going to say, okay, if you think it's a good idea, we want you to have some additional information in this piece of legislation to say, here's what I wanted to accomplish, and here's some proposed measures. Now, we've actually had this sort of framework in the Utah legislature for close to 20 years. It was something we called the Best Practice Initiative. Years ago, a legislator said, when we have a new program, we ought to be giving them some best practices to follow. In other words, are you going to put a strategic plan together for this? What are your measures going to be? What are your goals and objectives? And so we would have that, but the problem is there was nobody on the front end of that to say, okay, this is a new program, and get them that information. Our office would just do a guess. Every year we would look at legislation and we say, of all the pieces of legislation that passed, we think this is a new program. It looks like one. Or is it just an expansion of an existing program? Well, we're not sure. We'll get this information out to them. So for several years, we just kind of took our best shot at this. And we didn't, because we admittedly were not being held accountable. We weren't following up as well. In 2011, our president of the Senate said, we need to make this more formalized. And let's not just guess at the new programs. Let's have some criteria, and then let's have a performance note. So as Steve talked about, the legislature can decide whether a piece of legislation that's a new program can pass or not with this added information of the performance note. Then they can say, oh, I can see that this legislator's done his or her homework, that they have some proposed measures. So this then allowed our office to kind of, if the bill passed and became law, we became the custodians of that. And so, like, for example, last year, I think there were 30 or so pieces of legislation that were considered new programs or an expansion of such an extent that it needed to be followed. We then know specifically that here's 30 pieces of legislation to send to, for example, the Department of Health on this oral care, and say, hey, here's some best practices that get followed nationwide, or setting up a new program. Have you looked at the vision of this and the mission, and how will that turn into goals and objectives, and how are you going to measure this? And so we've been able to follow that. I have the handout. You can see the handout that says best practices on it. And if you can see that, that's the one it looks like. This is actually a page out of our annual report. Well, every year we show where a program is in this 3-year cycle. The first year we give them the best practices and say, expect to hear from us in a year where this program is. The first year we want a self-evaluation from the agency to tell us, we say, what did you determine from the legislation was your planning on this, your measures and so forth. And then we give them another whole year. I shouldn't say we, it was the legislation. And Steve and I have talked about whether that's too much time. But for now, we give them another year to really scrub that down. At the end of that second year, we'll go back in and ask for another self-report. And based on that, we do some quick, very quick follow-up work to determine whether this program is meeting its goals and objectives, where the spending is, and we may or may not recommend some audit work. And so the example I gave you from this page of our annual report, if you go 2/3 down the way of the page, we said that one 2013 program with questions is recommended for limited scope audit. We had a bill pass on the STEM program. I think STEM is something known nationwide about science, technology, engineering, and math. To give them a significant amount of money to implement some action centers. And what we found is the STEM, those running the STEM program weren't giving us back data that we couldn't tell what they were doing. And so we recommended to our leadership, this is a program we've had going for a couple of years now. We can't tell you the benefits. Not that there aren't any, but the data's not there. So we did some audit work there, and we were able to find some ways to help them get this program where it needed to be. And I know I'm staying pretty high level, but that's just an example of how we were able to use the structure of the follow-up in our offices and with the legislators to really not just have anecdotal follow-up, because this can happen on anywhere from 1 to 30 programs. We don't end up doing a lot every year because we would then become just doing follow-up and not be a post-audit function. But it's one of our duties. Along with that, there was one other handout. It's titled the 4 Most Common Pitfalls Made by State Agencies. I really was excited to work this in because it's not specifically tied to our best practice performance note work, but I will sometimes have agency heads and others preparing for an audit or saying, you know, I think you guys are going to come audit us at some point. What should I be focusing on? And, you know, we actually have empirical data that shows us these are areas where mistakes are made. And if you look at these 4, all of you are going to say, oh yeah, this makes sense. But we were able to show through our recommendations where are we recommending things need to be fixed. First and foremost is one of the themes of this conference you're holding, oversight. We found that a lot of recommendations are just agencies just lack good governance or the structure's off in some way. They don't have good policy or procedure or strategic planning. The performance standards don't exist or measures are off. They're measuring outputs instead of outcomes. And then just weak data overall. When I first started auditing 25 years ago, you would go to a file cabinet, pull the file cabinet out and look at files. Now we just download hundreds of thousands of rows of data. If this data is not clean, if the data is not, if the data sets aren't, the complete set, we can't do our work because we don't do a lot of sampling anymore. We just download the whole set. And so I think this is one area that you're welcome to borrow from our state to show, data that we validated over the years are some pitfall areas that you can focus on. And let me take the last area, and the handout that goes with this one would be it's the one titled Oversight Through Follow-Up. It's got the thought bubble there, and then a page from our annual report. And I'm calling this one, this is our legislative action item area. So when all else fails, has everybody found that one? When all else fails, we're saying legislative leadership, you play a role, committees play a role, but individual legislators, I will have members of the different caucuses come and say, what can we do? Is there something we can follow up on? And as nonpartisan staff, I can direct them to parts of our audits that even through all these systems that we have in place, just still haven't been implemented. So this is a page of our annual report. You can see the one right there at the top. It says an in-depth follow-up of projections of Utah's water needs. So we did a series of audits on water. Now, we're the third driest state in the nation. Water is fighting words in Utah. I think they used to say, you don't fight over drinking, you fight over water. So we've done a lot of work here, but for whatever reason, even though we started metering our water better and doing some other things with accountability, we had municipalities that weren't reporting their unaccounted water. And this is water that you might lose through bad pipes, or when you turn on your fire hydrants to test them. Thousands of gallons of water get used for those tests, and they weren't being factored into our overall water needs. Believe it or not, in 2019 in the state of Utah, again, the third driest state, we had parts of the state where people would water their lawns and the water was not metered. So they would pay a flat fee whether they watered for 10 minutes a day or all day long. And so this is the kind of thing that we relied on individual legislators. If a committee would not take hold of a recommendation, we would put this in and say, hey, here's some action items that haven't been acted on, and facilitate that. So those are three areas I think that you could consider. And I'm not, super familiar with your Legislative Budget and Finance Committee, which I think is your equivalent of our audit committee. But maybe they have some of those controls in place already, but those are some for consideration. So those would be my comments.
Would you mind if I elaborated on performance notes just for a minute? A couple of interesting things that you might find interesting. So when the Senate president had this idea, he envisioned performance notes enhancing the debate on the floor for whether a bill should pass or not. So that's why we have a short deadline on them. And you might find it interesting to know that the agencies that are going to be implementing the program are the ones responsible for writing the performance note or putting the measures in place. And that sometimes will create a conflict because an agency may not even want that new program. Yeah. But so it's an interesting perspective. I'm not sure if it's best to have the agency do it or to have the sponsoring legislator write that performance note. You can see conflicts either way. We've decided it's just best to have the agencies do it. And over time, they've gotten better at kind of putting aside their biases and putting in some performance measures that they think the bill expects them to do. So we get those in place. And then as the bill goes through the process, and if it passes and gets funded and becomes a new program, if it's not measuring up to those performance measures over time, the auditor's office can actually recommend after, what is it, third year, Darren, or so, that the program go away. And that's a pretty severe result, and I don't think it's happened yet, but that's one option for how those should happen. When the sponsor of the legislation that created performance notes intentionally left us as staff out of the process of deciding what those measures should be and what should go in the performance note, we have the responsibility to gather them, send it to the agency, gather responses, and put it out there on the internet. But we don't edit, other than I might edit out some grammar mistakes or something like that. But I will not go in there and try to adjust the performance note. That's the agency's and it's their responsibility. And just so another option is if the agency comes back with something that's pretty weird, the sponsor can reject that performance note. And we still publish it, but we publish a note at the end of it that says the sponsor has rejected this note. Then the sponsor has the option to provide a note of his or her own that would also get posted. So it's not like the sponsor is completely left out of it, but really they only step in place if they disagree with something that's put in there. Just thought you might find that somewhat helpful in the way performance notes work.
That's terrific. Let me first start off with a quick question. For the fiscal notes and performance notes, do you have an integrated computer system that allows you to communicate with agencies? So it's an internal upload. And then for the local government aspect of that, like we have the second most number of local governments in the entire country. So that hurt my brain a little bit thinking about how to coordinate with all those entities. So how do you work that from the local government perspective?
Okay, great. Yeah, when I first started here, everything was done by fax machine and phone call and email spreadsheets. Over time, with having a 3-day deadline, we found that we were spending one of our days just communicating out there to the world what bills were and trying to get a response. We've since developed an automatic email with some algorithms in a database. So if the bill impacts a certain area of code, we have registered or signed up all the state agencies that are interested in that section of code, and they get an automatic email. The minute the bill is made public, that email goes out to all the agencies saying, this bill's out there, get us a fiscal note within 24 hours. So we're pretty strict. We give everybody 24 hours to get back to us, and we take 24 hours to write the note, then we take 24 hours to give it a quality review, and that's our 72 hour process. But yeah, all automatic, sending out by emails, and we have it all in a database. And if there's a tie, say it impacts two agencies the same section of code, then we go to a second tier of decision criteria to see which agency should get be the lead agency on that review. So multiple agencies can get assigned one bill for a fiscal note. We will gather all the data here, and sometimes we get conflicts. An agency will assume, 5 convicts are going to be imprisoned. Another agency, like the Attorney General, might say, well, we're going to get 10 of those. And so we have to kind of work out between the two agencies how it's going to work. So yeah, luckily that's saved us a lot of time by email, automating that process to assign them. And then we do have a fiscal note system where we write all of our fiscal notes. They used to be all paper driven in a folder. It's now all electronic. So the analyst takes what the agency wrote. We can just click. If we like what the agency wrote, we can just click and put that right in the fiscal note and then make some edits on it. And then it goes straight to the supervisor in our office for review. And then if he approves it, it goes to the director, and the director can send it out. So that's all electronic now, no paper, but fortunately, and that saved us a lot of time. Now, as far as local governments are concerned, we've invited every local government that wants to participate and receive the emails asking them for input on the fiscal note. But we found that we're better off when we deal with representatives of local governments. So in Utah, we have the Utah Association of Counties, and we have the Utah League of Cities and Towns. They're our primary contacts on getting response for our fiscal notes. But our major cities, such as Salt Lake City and West Valley City, and even some of our authorities, such as the Utah Transit Authority and some of the special districts, they've also found that they want to give input sometimes too. So we've included them on the emails as well. So Salt Lake City will weigh in at times when they think the bill is meaty enough that they should have their input given to us. Most of the time they won't. They're happy to rely on Utah League of Cities and Towns. But we'll gladly send that email out to every local government that wants to get it. And almost in a wiki concept, let anybody who wants to respond back to us do that. And then we'll synthesize all together. And the fiscal note becomes our responsibility. Sometimes agencies will say something like, well, if you don't, they'll tell the sponsor, if you don't change that language, we're going to slap a big fiscal note on that bill. And that kind of frustrates us because it's not the agency's fiscal note, it's our fiscal note. We'll take their input. If they want to give us crazy input, that's fine, but they're going to lose some of their trustworthiness with us. But then we'll put the we'll put the fiscal note on the bill based on our best judgment about what we received from input from everybody, as well as the data that we collect on our own. Did that help answer your question?
Absolutely. Next question's from our House Majority Appropriations Chairman, Stan Saylor.
Here in Pennsylvania, we don't do a fiscal note out of my office until the bill is on its third and last day of consideration. We come throughout the committee. Somebody might ask us what our thoughts are fiscally on it, but we don't do a note until it's on third consideration and after it's been amended. What's your process out there? When do you do the performance, all those kind of things and those notes, regulatory notes? Do you do it when it comes out of committee, before it comes out of committee? On its we have third consideration, which is after the amendment process, the next day before it's voted on final passage is when we do the fiscal note. How do you handle that there?
We start the fiscal note process as soon as the bill is numbered and made public. So it's done electronically. Our Office of Legislative Research General Counsel, they finish the bill, they just click a button to make it public, and we immediately get an email, and it goes into our fiscal note system, and that's when our 72-hour clock starts. It's really 3 business days. It's not 72 hours. So if we get the bill on a Friday, we have till Tuesday to get it done. But yeah, it's immediate, and it's for every bill. And then if the bill gets amended, then we make a judgment call if the amendment was significant enough to change the fiscal note, and we'll make that change. If the bill is substituted, then we will automatically do a new fiscal note on that substitute bill. And then by legislative rule, the bill will not go to a committee unless it has a fiscal note on it. So it will be held in rules until they know there's a fiscal note, and then they'll issue it out to a standing committee for their review. And sometimes the Senate will play that a little bit. They'll know that if it's in its, excuse me, if the bill is in its 48th hour, they will know that the fiscal note will be coming in 24 hours. So they'll release that to a committee that's going to meet in 24 hours, hoping that the two will align. And we almost always do that, but every once in a while we need a little bit more time on a complex bill, and we'll have to tell them, hey, slow down on this particular bill. We're not got a fiscal ready quite in time yet. And so they'll just get held in committee or go back to rules until we get that done. Every once in a while, if a bill gets a substitute, it's safe all through the process and it's on the floor, then suddenly there's a substitute bill, then we'll have to make sure we notify the leadership before they finish that bill that they substituted it and we're still working on that fiscal note. Give us a little time to get that done before you pass the bill, or you can end up passing a bill that has a budgetary impact before you realize what your whole budget should be.
Do you do fiscal notes on your amendments as well? Or do you wait till they're put into a bill?
So we will normally, we review every bill's amendment to see if it should have a fiscal note, a revised fiscal note, or an amended fiscal note, is what I should say, an amended fiscal note. So we don't, in the majority of cases we don't, but maybe 20% of them have a significant enough change that changes the fiscal note that we will revise or amend our fiscal note.
Okay. Very good, thank you.
Yeah.
Next up is State Senator Kristen Phillips Hill.
I know that some things are the same in Utah and Pennsylvania. Everybody likes to beat up on the Senate. So that's some Pennsylvania humor. Question for you. So you have this legislative audit function that came into place, it looks like 2011, and you began your legislative audits in 2013. And all of those audits have been done prospectively on legislation that has been generated and passed by your General Assembly. Is that correct?
So the follow-up, when it involves what I refer to as the best practices and the performance notes, it gets a little confusing because that's a different process than...
Right, I'm transitioning back to what you originally spoke about, which was your legislative audit function, not your performance notes.
Okay.
So when the legislative audit provisions were put into place, what happened to all those statutes and regulations that were existing on the books? Did you have some sort of a mechanism to go back and make determinations as to, you know, whether they've actually closed that policy circle that you talk about, you know, where you identify the problem, you consider legislation, you enact the legislation, the agencies interpret and implement the policy. So for things that have been passed prior to the implementation, has there been an attempt to do legislative audits on those statutes and regulations?
You know, that's, when that was first put in place, I thought it was great legislation for us to send the agencies these best practices. And the truth was, admittedly, we weren't following through on that as much as we should have been. Here and there might have been a program that we knew wasn't being responsive. So the general answer is we didn't do a lot in those early years. It wasn't until the front end piece of that legislation came along in 2011 where we said, okay, we're going to make it much more obvious where to start the process. And we will have a list of what are new programs. There will be these bills that have a performance note. And then if they pass, there'll be a list of, I think I said an example was about 30. And so, yeah, so now we're looking over these years. I think that just by virtue of having something in place where we're communicating with these agencies and say, we're going to expect these self-assessments from you, I think that has helped us raise the quality of these programs. Because like I said, we've only had a handful over the years where we've had to recommend for, a little bit of audit work. Because we've been able to work with them and say, you need to maybe consider some better performance measures and those kinds of things. But we don't have an exhaustive list of everything that we may have changed over the years. I don't know if you're asking for that, but the general feel is that once we coupled the best practice with the performance note requirement is when this really started to have better accountability. And we can go back now and show where there was a program here or there that needed some additional work. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent. So really, you've not done anything to address the existing laws that are on the books. You're only going prospectively, but you're saying that auditing the what you're passing from, the point of implementation going forward has helped address some of the problems you've had with statutes, regulations in the past. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, that's correct. Now, you do touch on one other function that our office provides is we had a legislator several years ago getting to exactly the point that you're getting to is, look, there are so many laws on the books and so many huge budgets. Somebody ought to be looking at this on a rotating basis. If there's 25 state agencies, over 25 years, everybody ought to get an audit. All the functions, the different laws ought to get looked at. And so now Steve's office will look at the budget and do a drill down, just through the course of the legislative process. But we had legislation recently that said, your office has the resources to spend the time you need to go in and do a deep dive. Now, the fiscal office and research office, they've always been a little jealous of us because we usually aren't told, have that done in a month. We're told, you get us the answer when you have the answer. So we have audits that will sometimes last 9 months. And so what we did with this legislation on the in-depth budget review was say, hey, on a rotating basis, you ought to go to the Tax Commission, and then the Department of Agriculture, and then the Department of Commerce, and do these in-depth budget reviews. So we've added to where we do 2 of those a year, and then they will go into this committee, lead and review committee structure, where so that would in essence accomplish what you were talking about, but unfortunately at the speed of government. It's really, I don't know of a faster way to do it. unless we triple the size of government, which, nobody wants to do. So
Right.
does that answer your question?
It
better?
does. It does. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
If I could jump in with a fiscal perspective on that really quickly, we had a bill passed, it was actually a resolution that passed last session that requires appropriated subcommittees to do a de facto zero-based budget for 20% of the budgets every year, so that every agency undergoes some kind of a zero-based review every 5 years. So every 5 years, every agency goes through at least one zero-based budget. Now, you hear the word zero-based budget and you think of, the Department of Defense back in the 70s that collapsed and it didn't work. And we can realistically only do so much over an interim with 3 subcommittee meetings that last 3 hours each. So it's a lot of groundwork by staff outside of those meetings, really teeing up the main issues that we think the legislative committees can hear. But we still have that zero-based, however you want to call it. We call it accountable-based budgets because that's what we had to call it to get it to pass. Anyway, so that's another deep review that we do on agencies to make sure their budgets are, aren't just getting patted over the years and passing on their own inertia.
Excellent. Next question from Representative Barb Gleim.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering, through the policy circle page that you provided, when you get to the audit function that is performed, do you ever find that maybe 2 agencies or 2 departments have financial cannibalization? And do you do anything about that reporting and make any recommendations?
That's a great question. The one caveat I should have given in this policy circle is it would be ideal if, like the senator mentioned, if we could follow up on every function. What happens through our audit committee, I should have mentioned, is we only audit, other than the follow-up with the performance notes, we only audit what they prioritize. And so our workload is completely generated by this 6-member committee. So we may or may not be performing 2 audits at the same time where we had that kind of situation merge. But yeah, we'll frequently have audits where we will say, well, the audit was of a particular agency, Department of Corrections, but we actually think that there's a function that should be taken over by the Attorney General's office because of some of that cannibalization. So unfortunately, it might just be serendipitous at this point, but that's a great question.
Thank you.
Steve, can you review how you do your volatility analysis or is it the sustainability? Is it sustainability revenues where you check the volatility of your revenue structure? Can you kind of go over that process and how you do it?
Okay. I couldn't hear you super well. What I heard you say is just a review of how we review volatility of our revenue.
Yes, I don't know if it's newer or not, but I was listening to the wonderful Walker Alliance summit in Atlanta, and they mentioned that Utah does a volatility analysis every year, or a 3-year cycle or something.
Every 3 years, yeah. So we have now a 3-year cycle. And now, off the top of my head, I hope I can remember them all, but 1 year is volatility analysis, 1 year is stress testing of our budget, and now the 3rd year is escaping me. But anyway, so every 3 years we'll do that volatility analysis, and we'll do analysis of volatility of our major tax types, such as sales tax and income tax. And the primary reason for that is to decide how much money we should be depositing in our rainy day funds. We have 2 separate funds. We have one for the income tax. We call it the education fund. Just parenthetically, in Utah, we have a constitutional provision that income tax can only be spent on education. So therefore, all income tax goes into our education fund, and all sales tax goes into our general fund. The general fund can be spent on anything. But we basically look at our forecasts over the last several years and say, how far were we off when we were off? And therefore, we account for that forecasting error, and we say to the legislature, you should have enough money in your rainy day fund to compensate for any forecasting, the average forecasting error in revenues, so that in any particular year, if we're way off, that you have enough money to cover that forecasting error. And then on top of that, it's just whatever the legislature thinks ought to go in there to account for the possibility of a recession or something like that. But really, we try to encourage legislators to use the rainy day funds for recessionary reasons near the end of their toolbox, because that's a one-time fix. And if a recession extends on for multiple years, if you use that arrow, you have nothing left in your quiver after a while. So it's based on statistics. Our economists look at it, look at trends, and both income tax, all kinds of taxes, as well as forecasting, and give the legislature a revenue, a ballpark. And this has resulted in increases in what we recommend goes into the rainy day fund. Several years ago, we estimated that 9% of the appropriations from the income tax ought to go into rainy day. We'll have a balance equal to 99% of the last fiscal year's appropriation. Now we're up to 11%, just because the income tax is proving to be more volatile than the sales tax. I'm sure it's the same way all across the country. So we recommend 9% of balances of appropriations go into the general rainy day fund, 11% of income tax go into the education fund, rainy day fund. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and then can you go over your next step of stress testing your budget? I don't think we've ever done that. I'm not sure we want to in Pennsylvania because I'm not sure how well it turned out. But can you go over that process too?
Yeah. So that is, you've probably heard of Dodd-Frank and the stress testing they require for banks to do. We really borrowed heavily from that. So we said, what are some parameters we could set in place where we think that where the budget could handle a medium, what should you call it, a mild, medium, or severe recession. And let's look at all of what the economic impact of that would be. And that includes such as during a recession, as we all know, Medicaid and social services, the demand for those goes up. At the same time, your revenue goes down. So what's the impact? What's the estimated impact of those three kinds of recession on services as well as revenue? And what do we have in reserves that we can compensate for that with? So how much do we have in rainy day funds? What's in our restricted accounts that we could borrow from if we had to? What could we shift to fees? It's just a comprehensive look at all of our resources out there to help us get through that. And how many years could we get through in that kind of situation? And I would be happy to send you a copy of our last volatility report and our stress testing report if that would be helpful.
That'd be terrific. We would greatly appreciate that. With that, any other
We'll
follow-up
send those
questions?
off to Jordan.
Perfect. Any other questions from the members? None? Gentlemen, thank you so much. We are very jealous. You're highly regarded as one of the best financially managed states in the entire country. So congratulations. Keep up the good work. And we really appreciate your time today to discuss all the good things you're doing in Utah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, too. It's been an honor to talk to you.
Now, Jordan has our contact information. We'd be happy to send anything, if there were follow-up questions, any other handouts or links to our website, anything like that. Happy to take any time individually. We're with the legislature because we love the institution. We zealously guard it as the best branch of government.
Amen.
We love working one-on-one, so anything we can help.
Will do. Thank you both so much. Take care.
Thank you.